Welcome everyone. My name's Audrey. I've been hosting the Q&As here for Music Calgary SoundOff Summit over the past couple of weeks. This is the last Q&A, so thanks so much for joining us. Before we begin, it's important to acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda Nations, the Métis Nation Region 3, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region. Joined here today with Adam Bentley, who is digital marketing and publicist at Auteur Research. He was also part of a panel earlier this week with a few other folks, including Jason Grishkoff, the founder of Submit Hub, and Nicholas Bouchard, the head of distribution Canada at Believe Digital. So if you want to check that out, we will put the link in the chat. And if you also want to ask any questions to Adam, you can do so in the chat function or the Q&A function, and we'll keep up with those. So thank you so much for joining us today, Adam. Hope your day is going well so far.
Yeah, it's been great.
Cool. So I guess we'll just get started here with maybe a little introduction about yourself, and then maybe a bit about Auteur Research and how it's evolved over the years and its role in the music making and distributing and industry process, I guess.
Sure. So my name is Adam Bentley, and I am, I guess, the founder of Auteur Research. It's about 12 and a half years ago that I started doing the work that became Auteur Research, or maybe even a little bit longer than that. At first, I definitely didn't think I was starting anything. I just thought I was helping out some friends. Originally, you know, the company was very, very focused on online press. That is still one of the main foundations of what we do. But over the last few years, we've moved into user-generated playlisting and some project management, and also digital marketing. In the last 2 years, we've started doing more and more of that. So working around ad strategy and social media strategy. We're now a team of 9 people, fairly spread out. I'm in Hamilton, and so are some of the other team members, but we have individuals in Toronto and New York and LA and Vancouver as well. I have a pretty amazing team. They're all incredible people. And yeah, we're responsible, working sometimes just 6 weeks around a project, around one song, or other times we're in a rollout that may last a year or even a little bit longer than that. In some cases, you know, the rollouts are getting longer and longer as it's becoming more and more of a single world. So that's, I guess, a general overview of what we do.
That's great, thanks. And I guess I was kind of curious too about, like, when you did grow into doing more curated playlists and kind of moving more digital as the times get more digital, was that a process that you kind of like grew into and kind of had to learn from a DIY standpoint and learn as you go and collaborate with people, or did you have some background and experience in that beforehand?
I think, like most of these things, it was, you know, fairly accidental. Even when I started doing this, I was just, I had a band, I was got a band, I was trying to figure out how to get, you know, more notice around the band. So I started reaching out to bloggers, and they started writing about us. And then I actually had a friend, I was studio managing a studio in Hamilton called Catherine North. And the owner of the studio, Dan Aiken, said, hey, like, you should do this for some of the people that are coming through the studio. You see, and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, I'm just emailing people. He's like, I think you know what you're doing. You got a few hundred pieces of press on your record. So, and it just grew organically. I thought it was just something, you know, to do while I was playing, and then it just kind of kept evolving organically into something that became more and more substantial in my life. And it really, you know, I didn't see it as a territory. You know, I didn't think, oh, I'm in Canada, I'm a Canadian publicist. So I didn't really think about television or radio or kind of what print at that time. So it was all very online focused. So when playlisting started becoming more and more a thing, I think around 2015, I started noticing some of our artists really doing well on Spotify. They didn't have a label, and they didn't have, you know, management or distro, and we didn't know what was going on. Why was this happening? And I think the eureka moment was we had an artist in this band was locked out of their email account basically from like the second day of the campaign. So for weeks we're running this campaign. We have no conversation with the artist, but it's, well, if they've hired us to do this, we better do a good job. Campaign goes fairly well. And when we were done, there was a few 100,000 plays on a song. And I went, okay, so the band isn't even online. And they don't have anybody else working this. There has to be something that we're doing. And we realized we were getting on these user-generated playlists that bloggers had started. And there was a value in that as both algorithmically, and some of them also could compound with their plays, but it was getting noticed, just like they were, a lot of the streaming services were paying attention to what was happening online. And, you know, they're the same way like SEO kind of drives things. It seemed like that was a key element of the streaming services model for independent artists. It was much easier then. There was a lot less going up into the platform. You know, there wasn't 60,000 songs uploaded a day at that point. But these user-generated playlists seem to have some algorithmic value to them, even in a small way. So we started thinking, okay, who else is there? And we noticed there was a lot of individual users that had strong playlists that seemed to have really a niche focus that fed into, you know, getting Discover Weekly or getting on Fresh Finds or things that weren't directly tied to editorial, but they then could get you noticed with editorial. So we started building up that. Late 2015, we started looking into more and more of brands that had playlists and individual users that had playlists that had followings. And it became integrated with the online press. I still don't feel like we're a playlisting company. I feel like we're a PR company that just thinks about playlisting in the work that we're doing to try to do best practices that are going to help that side of things, since everything is so focused on, you know, the work that artists can do in line with DSPs. So that's kind of, it was very organic. We had no idea. It was accidental. Like when we were looking in 2015 and 2016 and seeing this growth happening, we really didn't know why it was happening. And there's still definitely a lot of gray area in terms of what is the actual algorithm and what's actually happening and what we can do to help, but we try to accumulate as many best practices as possible.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. And I guess that touches on one of my next questions a little bit. We were talking a couple weeks ago with Benjamin Shapiro, who was involved in Spotify at one point in time, and he was talking about the difference of kind of engaging lean in listeners versus lean back listeners. And I think having those curated playlists that are really niche on certain subgenres and stuff really helps with that to some extent. But then at the same time, algorithms can also maybe cause people to sit back a little bit and do a little bit less of the work on finding music for themselves. So I guess one of my questions was, have you noticed any ways that algorithms have positively or negatively affected artists that you work with in your company? I know it's a bit of a big question. But.
Yeah, I think it is hard to say exactly how that's worked. There is a problem with passive listening. I remember one of our artists that we were working for, kind of, again, early days, and they had millions of plays on this one song, but they weren't really growing their fan base at all. You could tell that they weren't getting people that were going, oh, I love this band. It was very passive. No one was connecting. So I think as an artist, you know, that's where press can come in line as well, you know, building out the narrative so people can, you know, dive into the music a little bit more. And the work that you can do on socials is becoming increasingly important to have that, you know, your sonic and visual aesthetic come across in a way that's engaging. I think if you rely just on playlists, you're going to be disappointed, because eventually you're gonna hit a point there where you're probably not going to have people engaging in a major way. I bet if you looked at different types of playlists, you have different types of users as well. You know, some people will go in to become more of a, you know, quote unquote fan in certain playlists than others. But I think that is the risk of algorithmic playlisting, is that things that are almost ignorable but fit a certain sound can perform really well, but they don't have any it's almost like empty calorie listening. So I think there is a tendency for some artists to go, okay, I need to sound like this because this will work on playlisting. But there is a limitation to that, because if you don't have a base of people that actually like the music you're making, there's not really much of a point to that. It's a tough thing, because I know we have some artists that we've worked with that are very idiosyncratic in their approach and how they present themselves and who they are. And it's probably more difficult to work those projects now than it was 5, 6, 7 years ago. You know, I say like a lot of the beginning stage of this, I was working like quirky indie rock projects, and those can still do well, but it's way harder now, because if your kind of personality and character sticks out in a way that doesn't align with everything else, you can run into some roadblocks. So I think for an artist, though, you have to continue doing what you love and what what makes you stand out. So getting too obsessed with, numbers and stats and the algorithm can be detrimental. I think you just one of the most important things is just continuing to do things. My two favorite words that I overuse all the time when talking to people now are stockpile and consistency. So if you can stockpile as an artist a lot of material, and then you can consistently put that into the world, you can build out your own ecosystem. But if you release something and disappear for a while, it's hard for people to come into what you're doing. So that's why, like, if you have a stockpile, there isn't the same pressure. You don't have to make something just to make something. You have it and you're ready to go. Because once you start the process, I think this is something I always stress. Once you start releasing things, you're kind of in a never-ending cycle now, especially as an emerging artist. And that can be overwhelming quickly. So if you give yourself that kind of nest egg, it can help you in the future. And also, it's a long process for the most part. Everybody likes to mention the stories of like, oh, I released one song and then it went viral and it was huge. Those are often very rare, and sometimes they're even like a different variation of that person's musical output. A different name, they've wiped everything clean they've released before. It's often a long game to build out a real audience, and I think the streaming can be detrimental in that way, and algorithms can be detrimental in that way, to become obsessed with just the numbers. You should be just obsessed about building out your catalog, and trying to present your music in a way that, that's what we get involved in, where people can actually hear it. But even if somebody likes something, that doesn't mean they're going to add it instantly to a playlist the first time or write about it the first time. You might have to build up some trust there. There was a lot of artists that and I think Spotify had a problem with this, where in 2015, 2016, 2017, they'd release 1 or 2 songs, they'd get a lot of support, and then they'd disappear. And that wasn't great for the listeners, because they had invested in something that wasn't actually going anywhere. And the algorithm wasn't kind of sifting through that. And now that consistency of release is definitely becoming a bigger part of how people get involved. So yeah, that's a really long-winded, rambling sort of explanation, but it's a really difficult one to pinpoint.
We love those long rambling answers here, so never feel afraid to do that. It's great information.
What I'm known for.
Yeah, it's a great point, because like if you do have one really great song, that's awesome, but you don't want to be stuck on someone's like running playlist forever, right? You gotta build off somewhere. So that's a good point. I think we were talking to another person a couple weeks ago, Stacey Kerslake, who suggested that bands almost treat their Spotify profile or their streaming platform profiles as a social media account. Would you agree with that? Or like, do you have any tips on ways to kind of increase your presence on your Spotify profile as a band to attract that audience if they do decide to click on your profile or explore more through a streaming platform before they explore other social media accounts that you have?
Yeah, like it's difficult in some ways because there isn't a dialogue that happens on there. So that's the one difference, where I'd say on another social media you can actually have like a back and forth, where on the streaming services, it's one way. Now, the biggest thing is just have the basics up there. Have your bio, have photos. If you have, merch, have that up there. Have, hopefully when touring comes back, you can have your tour dates on the platform. Make playlists, direct people there as much as you can. I think really gaining followers on platforms now is really, really important, because then you have them. And I think conversion rates are such an important thing. So saves to plays or followers to plays. But if you have people as followers, it's more likely that they're going to listen to your music. And there was a statistic that I just saw the other day, and I don't have it written down, but it's much more likely if somebody is following you that they're going to play your music later. So my biggest thing when talking to artists, and we don't directly get involved in this, but all of these things help us. We now have, when we're working with someone, we have multiple kind of documents that we send over to give best practices on various platforms, socials and streaming. And one of them is try to push people to follow you, and at the same time, don't make that the only thing that you're talking about. You have to talk about the things that make people interested, and it's different for every artist and how they're going to do that. But you'll see some organic growth, of course, if you get some traction on any of these. But really, even when you have traction, say you get on Fresh Finds, you need to be posting that everywhere, and also directing people back to your profile page. That's one thing we find that's really, really helpful is if, say, you're running an ad, or you're just like telling people you have new music. Sometimes you can be just focused on that song. It is about building profile as much as it is about getting people just to get into that one track. So, and if you can bring people into the ecosystem and they press that button, there's a better chance they're going to continue listening to what you're doing and check out what you're doing in the future.
That's great. Thank you. And we did have a couple of listeners from your panel a couple of days ago here that were wondering about the most effective way to pitch your songs to playlists, or to try to gain followers on Spotify as well. Like, what's the best way to brand yourself in that regard to get recognized on a platform that receives so much content?
I think, it's becoming harder for editorial. Major distribution prioritizes a lot of releases. Most of those releases are the things that you see on New Music Friday and those front-facing, those early ad playlists. That's not to say that independents don't get chosen from there, because it does happen randomly, but you're now up against that kind of system and the legacy artists, people that have done well previously. But still, using the pitch tool at the back end, for Spotify for Artists is a great idea. But also, I think if you need to show growth to make it worth anybody checking it out. So if again, conversion rates are a huge one. So if you can get a play when somebody saves or follows or checks out your music, or a play and then a follow, those are all really important things. And I think you really have to direct people from socials, like I was saying, back into that platform. And where we're finding better success is when you are going to your profile page, not to the song, but to the profile page. There's a better chance people can get into your ecosystem. That's why you need to have all of that stuff built out, all your photos, all your bio information. I would change these every time you're releasing something. I would alter them around the new music to make it always seem fresh and also relatable to what you're putting out there. I think a hard thing for artists now is that the content you're having to build is almost at an unbelievable level. Between TikTok and Reels and your normal kind of posts you would use on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. There's a lot you can do. I suggest building out a content calendar before, so you have a game plan. Okay, this is my release. 2 weeks before, I'm going to start, telling people that it's coming. I tend to say not to go overboard with that, because ideally you want people day of to really engage. Those first, 24, 36, 48 hours, they're really important. And if you can show that you have major growth, say you're even at, basically no listeners and no one's been paying attention, no followers. If you have a major increase in that first, 48 hours, that's going to feed into that algorithm. And that's going to showcase what, that, okay, this is maybe something we should be paying attention to because this is outperforming X number of tracks that happened. And even tracks, if an artist that is popular on there, but doesn't have the right metrics, they can also fall back, and that's where you can kind of find your way in. And then the next part is just consistency over the next 3-4 weeks. We see a lot of algorithmic playlisting kick in, even sometimes months afterwards. And often with that is it's long-term metric build. So when you're building out your content calendars, having things to share consistently, having new content consistently that's going to direct people back, but have a variety of things that people are going to still be interested in. I think that's really important. You have to make it interesting at the same time. So it can't just be about follow me, play my song. Those call to actions are going to wear people down. But at the same time, you need to be posting way more than you think you do. Whenever artists are like, am I posting too much? I never say no. There's probably a few people maybe that go a little overboard, but out of like the hundreds of campaigns we'll work this year, 99% don't. You still have room to do more because of how much noise. Like Instagram wants you making 4 to 7 reels a week. TikTok wants you releasing things daily. And then if something does well on there, you want to follow that road. So if say you have a post where you're singing with your dog. This is an example we've had with one of our artists, Theo Tams. And the dog nuzzles up while he's been singing. It's this like just sweet moment. And Theo's got an incredible voice and it really connects with people. He's been able to do that consistently and have people engage with him. But at the same time, you just don't want to just do that because you just don't want to be known as that type of person. So you still scatter in new content, but you're still following things that are working for you. So I think a lot of times you have to take the information that's coming in real time and adjust, but have a game plan. So if something isn't really connecting, you still have things going. When we're running press and playlisting, we're always stressing. We have press catalogs that we send out to all of our artists, and it lists where you've been playlisted or what press has picked up, what type of feature it is. And we also have checkboxes of all the various social media platforms. Ideally, you're sharing on all of those platforms the way you can. Some things aren't going to work on Facebook, some things aren't going to work in other areas, but engaging as much as you can, that's easy ways of having your name just go back into the universe. You want people to see your name over and over and over again. I think that's the repetition needed for people to actually check out your music now is way higher than it's ever been. If somebody if me now went back into the past and talked to me in like 2013 and said, hey, this is what your campaigns are going to look like, I would think it was the last campaign I was ever running because there's so many touch points in them. It would have seemed impossible. And I think as an artist, you have to have that many touch points in everything you can do. And the thing, I don't really want to get into the good or bad about them, but social media right now is the real, you can make it beneficial for you, taking away all of the ethical conversation that we don't really need to get into today.
Do you have any, advice? There have been some people throughout the past couple of weeks kind of curious about when they're just getting started, how to build like a bio suited for a social media where it's, needs to be short and sweet, but still captivating. Do you have any tips on how to kind of best go about that?
I think the hardest thing in writing a bio is writing your own bio. I think I'm not really writing bios anymore personally, but if somebody asked me, what were the worst bios you ever wrote? They would all be ones for my own music, because it's just hard to step back and understand yourself on that level. So for me, connecting with a writer or connecting even with just a friend that that is a strong writer can be really helpful, and then build out a longer bio. That longer bio, you're going to be able to read and go, oh, that's the really interesting point. So that chunk, that narrative piece, it's almost like the pop hook of the narrative. Take the pop hook out, put it into, your socials with that, or put it in with your Spotify. I agree. Nobody wants to read 1,000 words on you right now. So finding something that is more digestible and immediate, I think is the way to go. But look outside of yourself. I think getting feedback from your peers and people that you trust is going to be a way of, of sifting through what is important. But everybody has a unique story somewhere, but you often need to get that pulled out of you in a way. That's something we do. We don't create at Auteur, we're not writing the bios, but we do ask lots of pointed questions that we know pull out the information that's going to work for us. And it's remarkable because when we're doing that, we do these quick pitches. So I rarely send giant for immediate release type press releases. Unless you're news, we try to avoid that. So we're taking like maybe 2 paragraphs, and then sometimes I only send 1 line. We build these bodies, and then depending on who I'm talking to, sometimes I just erase everything and go, oh, that's the line that describes the song, or that's the line that describes what this artist is about, or whatever it is. Often less is more there. But if I'm not able to see a larger picture, it's sometimes hard to know what to grab. So that's why we ask all of these questions. And I think as an artist, you can do that with a friend or a peer or a writer that you want to hire, and you'll get a better result that way.
I think that's great advice. I would have to agree. It's always hard to describe your own self in any situation, I guess, but especially when it's something that you hold so close, like your own music. It's hard to kind of describe sometimes to others and put that into words. So that's great.
That's why I never do these things usually, because I just find like, how am I going to be able to do this? And then you do them and you're asking questions, and all of the material just falls out of you then.
Yeah.
If I came on here and there was no one here, and they were like, okay, just talk for an hour about what you do, I'm going to run out of what to say pretty quickly. Where now we'll go back and forth. We could do this probably for 3 or 4 hours and it wouldn't be a problem. Not that we're going to do that, but
yeah, we'll stay on the hour, so don't worry, audience. But we could do 3 if we want. There's always the opportunity later on. I did have a question about, you're talking about stockpiling, and I think that's also a really great point of stockpiling enough music to stay consistent. I know you can't probably measure it too much, like what's the perfect amount to stockpile, but I guess what's the perfect amount to stockpile for you? What do you think is when can a band be like, okay, I think we have a good enough amount to, stay like consistent for a while on our postings? And would you suggest like maybe focusing a couple songs on like one social media platform and a couple on the other, or kind of get less targeted and kind of put them all out there on all the platforms? Because obviously TikTok and Spotify, sometimes the songs that people want to hear on those platforms are very different from one another, right? So
yeah, now we are seeing like there's more niches happening. Like TikTok is not just like pop music or music for teenagers anymore. It's aging up quickly, and there's like a lot of rock artists and a lot of indie artists, and even like there was the Caretaker challenge. I don't know if you know who the Caretaker is, but he makes very, very kind of experimental. His latest record series was about someone kind of going through the stages of dementia. So it starts off with these sampled records that are old jazz records, and eventually it becomes almost like pure noise records. This was a challenge to listen to this whole series on TikTok, which I would have never guessed. So there's like things that are getting pulled out in ways that you don't expect. But stockpiling, let's go with that, because I could fall down another rabbit hole. So for me, the hardest thing for an artist to think is you finish music and you want to show people right away. And you have to almost push against that. Now, you can do that. Anything can work. You could just put stuff online and it could connect, but it's less likely. So for me, say you're leading to an album of some sort, you almost have to think of like, when I drop that album, can I have new music fairly soon after that? So if you can map things out to that album and then think you can have new music that will come within the next 3, 6, 8 months from that. You know, there's no more like I release an album and then I can disappear for 2 years. You're still, maybe it's alt versions or remixes or covers, or there's a variety of things you can do, and it has to fit you as an artist. So maybe it's just a B-side track, something that's going to keep that going. But eventually you're going to have to start that process again, and that eventually is much quicker than before. So I don't think it's have 4 songs ready and then you're fine, because every artist is different. Me personally, it takes me about 5 or 6 years now to write a record. I need to have a pretty good stockpile of stuff to start that process if I'm there. If I'm someone that's writing a song, every few weeks, you may not have to worry about this as much. And if you're working from home and you don't have to work with other people in studios. But I think the biggest thing is trying to map out a general overview of how you're going to release things over a long period of time. And that long period of time has an endpoint where maybe a collection happens. As you can tell, I really love albums, but we're not necessarily in the album era of getting people to notice you. The album is almost, once you have those people that are big fans, they can dive deeper, and there's still huge narrative and legitimizing tools and fan tools. They're less the first step. So once that album drops, that's the end of a cycle in a way. Especially right now without touring. Touring it's been often the thing that can keep those things going. And there still are, radio can still pick up. You can still get reviews afterwards. You can still start pushing things on socials and bringing people back. But a lot of the rollout is about the build. And once that ends, within a certain amount of time, and it's again going to be different for every artist, you're going to have something new, and it's going to be shorter than before. And I think that's where you almost have to map it out. You get to the end, okay, can I have new music fairly soon afterwards? Maybe you don't release it for 6 months, but will you have new music almost ready soon after that? And that's my suggestion on how to stockpile. It's different for everybody. Everybody has a different workflow. Everybody has a different way of creating. So you have to just be honest with yourself. That's also a hard thing sometimes, where timelines, I always joke with videos. They're like, oh, it's going to be June 7th. We're going to have the video for sure. And in my head, I go, okay, so that means June 14th. Or maybe it's June 21st, or maybe it's like, these things usually don't happen in a perfect timeline. This is creativity. Again, we're not machines creating this stuff. But if you can adjust your schedule as you go. But if you have that schedule and you have that stockpile, you're not going to have that panic of, oh, I have to put something else out, and you put something subpar, because that's the other thing. We're in the singles world. I like to say that it's 1957 with computers. But those songs still have to be singles. There still are songs that work better on the album. Often songs that are my favorite songs, but maybe aren't as immediate. So you have to also weigh that. It's not just about like, I'm going to release every song and push them all as singles. Maybe you have soft singles in between, stuff that you keep kind of the algorithmic focus going, and you keep stuff for socials, but isn't the thing that you're going to go heavy with press or heavy, with the social media ad campaign or something. You're not going to go all in with that song, but you're going to still have stuff going. I think it's just about having things going as much as you can all the time. Of course, at a certain point when you've collected these, fan base, you're going to want to give them breathers, but it's a long road usually to get there. I know there was a second part of that question, but I don't remember anymore.
That's okay. That was a great answer. To be honest, I don't remember anymore either, so maybe we'll come back to it. But that's all right. That was great. Thank you. And I know you just did the panel with the Founder Summit Hub, so if this is a bit controversial because of that, but no problems. There was some listeners were just wondering if you think Summit Hub and similar competitors are here to stay, and if that's kind of the way of the future of getting your music onto streaming platforms. And maybe if you could give just like a brief overview of what Summit Hub and other competitors, like kind of how they operate for people who are wondering.
Oh, there's a poll that has just come.
There is a poll here for the audience.
Everybody do the poll while I explain Submit Hub. So Submit Hub, and there's these other portals, Groover, Use Soup, Playlist Push. There's a bunch. And with Submit Hub, I tend to, and I'm a little bit biased here. I've known Jason for a long time. We've done work with Jason on the PR side, so I'll put that out there that I do definitely have a bias. But the reason why I think I've been closer there is there's a transparency to that. You're not necessarily going to get the feedback you always want, and the feedback is not always useful on there, but at least he has systems in place where people have to engage to earn those credits. So basically you go on the platform, and on any of these platforms, and they all work different, but basically you're putting your music out there, and you are having, there's often like free features, but you only have a certain amount of free a day, and there's paid features, and certain people you can only access by using these credits. And these credits guarantee that they're going to listen to the songs, and in some, depending on the option you use, they'll give you some feedback, and then it has to be a certain amount of words. And there's playlisters, there's influencers, there's press people, bloggers. Sometimes it'll be people that do all of them, and so maybe sometimes they'll give you a social share, maybe they'll put you on their playlist, or maybe they'll write. And I do think there's definitely a benefit there. It's never going to be the full overview. I think in terms of our contact list, somewhere between 10 and 15% of our contacts are on the platform there. So it is not, again, everyone, but it's a good tool to have. And I think it's something that we utilize in our campaigns. Sometimes I've used other platforms that I don't like. There's not the transparency, but you also have to utilize them and know who you're pitching to, and giving them the right information. But I do think it took a while for it to really take off. We were, I would say, one of the first people that were on there, because we got a beta invite years ago. And at first I was like, oh, this sucks. Now there's going to be a bunch of people on here that I've had relationships with for years. And some have moved over there, and some I'm still talking on email, and some, it's kind of a hybrid. I don't think there's one way of doing it. And I think often these people will find your music in other places sometimes and write about it. It's not just about being on there. But it can be a helpful thing, but you have to utilize it and understand how it works, and you have to explore. And I know people that have success on all these different platforms. My biggest thing is, some of them get quite expensive, and is it the best use of your funds? Maybe not always, but I know Submit Hub sometimes, because you'll get feedback and you go, this person, why the hell are they talking about mastering or something? Like they're clearly just using terms that are almost excuses for them, but they're not into it. That's the end result. Like, people, that's a good thing about it. If they're into the music, they usually are going to do something with it. But I do think sometimes the repetition of people getting used to an artist on there, we see this often, where an artist that has more name recognition, we get better results. Often we're still emailing people and giving them more information that way, because you can present things that you can't on that platform. I do think they're around, so back to what I was going to say is, when we first got beta testing, I think most publicists were all like, fuck this, or sorry, I don't know, am I allowed to swear on this thing? Anyways, everyone was kind of mad about it. Let's put it that way. And I think a lot of us just said, oh, this can be a tool in our toolbox, but it's not everything. And it's something that's useful, but I don't think it's ever going to overtake and be the only way of doing things. I also don't see it going away. People have seen the value in it. You can just see how many submissions are on there. I don't know what it's at right now. It was 12 million last year around this time. I'm sure it's much, much higher. So yeah, I think like anything, it's very complex releasing music now, and that's just one element. If you're only doing that, that's probably not going to be enough. The social factors, all the other contacts that you can approach to get your music out there. Like I was saying before, if I went in that time machine, I wouldn't have believed how complex it was to try to hit up so many areas that it is now.
I want to switch gears a little bit here, and I'll also just put out a note for the audience here too. If you would like to submit a question live, you can do that in the chat in the Q&A function. And it looks like our poll results here are up. Looks like there's a little bit of a mix of what you were talking about as well. Some people have emailed curators and others will submit on Submit Hub and organic mixture. So interesting to see that the audience member here too has kind of various ways of getting their music out there too. I want to switch gears a tiny bit for another kind of long-winded philosophical kind of question, I guess. But I was a former DJ at CJSW, the local station in town here. So I always thought kind of the main role of a music curator or as a DJ is to challenge people's taste and encourage them to fall in love with sounds that they maybe wouldn't have considered listening to in the first place. But in the world of streaming, it's kind of unique because the listener gets the opportunity in some ways to become their own DJ and kind of choose their own soundtrack for things to some extent. So I was just curious of how you think these differing roles and kind of more, I guess, like listener autonomy in streaming services, how do you think this impacts the discovery process for listeners who are expanding their music taste?
I'm sure there's like statistical analysis of this that would be like much more pointed than what I'm presenting. But you see we go into artists, Spotify for Artists, and it's pretty varied. Like some artists that we work with are all driven by editorial playlists. They have very little of people playing from their profile page or their own catalog. There's others that it's all that, and you can see when people are fans, it leans that way. So if you have a good fan base, you're going to have more and more people that are going to actually engage and go for it on that deeper level where they're curating things. I think new music, though, on there happens definitely in that more passive way at first. And that's why you have to do all of these things. I always saw the role, and I could be generalizing here, but I always saw like bloggers and people that worked at college radio and things like that. That's where, I was a DJ at CMFU in Hamilton years ago. And that was my thing. I was curating something that I thought that people maybe weren't as aware of. And I think discovery was a big portion of that. And that's still why I think the blog ecosphere is still very, very helpful, because they're often highlighting things that aren't getting highlighted anywhere else. It's a starting point of building awareness. It doesn't have that same sort of viral ability that it had when I was first doing this, but the accumulation of mass of a lot of different, and it's hard now because some think bloggers still see themselves as journalists, some see themselves as curators, and some see themselves as a kind of hybrid of all of them. Where when I was first doing it, it was a lot of people that wanted to be writers, and I think there's still a lot, but now the lines are blurring. Some people have their blog just to highlight their playlist. But in the end, these individuals are way more open for discovery. They're the person that wants to be say, I heard them first. And that's really, really important to still have that ecosystem for emerging artists. And my, worry sometimes about streaming is it's going to cut away at that sort of discovery. And I think in some ways that it has over the last few years as things have settled. When Spotify first started, no one really knew how to game the system. And that was awesome because there was so many artists getting an opportunity on there to be heard that weren't. It still happens, but not at the same rate. And it does tend to be a little safer, I would say, in the choices and things that are taking off at first. But there's still this ecosystem below that you can build. It just takes a lot more people featuring and a lot more people adding it to their playlist than it once did. It's no longer, I'm going to get on that one site and that's going to get me on another dozen sites and then I'm going to have this fan base built. you know, you can get on any one site and it's not going to do that thing. You know, funny enough, you know, TikTok is almost like the disruptor of this right now, where there's so many different niches growing in there that algorithm only sees what people are connecting with for now. You know, I'm sure it'll become like everything else, and there'll be, you know, people know how to game the system already a little bit there, but I think because that works in such a give me more, give me more, give me more, which is daunting for artists. At the same time, there's more opportunity. You're seeing people that have no fan base getting sometimes millions of hits on a video, and that can direct back into other platforms. But you have to do a lot of work again to make people know what you're really about and what you really want them to focus on, which sometimes isn't what happens on TikTok. So I think back to your question about streaming services, the endless amount of choice is great. You can hear something and go in and dive into a catalog, but it's not necessarily set up to do that. It's set up to like funnel you in certain ways. That's why you see this discrepancy in plays with major artists compared to emerging artists. So I think as an emerging artist, don't get too hung up on the plays. Try to just build your ecosystem, you know, listener by listener, that are actually going to be involved in getting them into that category, that their profile, their catalog, playing your song. Because if that's happening, you have fans, that usually leads into algorithmic things happening as well. Editorial, that's a whole other thing, and I can't really speak to that. That's not something we normally pitch. Yeah, I think it's easy to get overwhelmed and look at somebody else, what they're doing and the stats they're putting out there. In the end, those stats, we have artists that are way more successful that have way less plays than some that have had that sort of major editorial support, because they've been actually able to take the people that are listening to their songs and turn them into, you know, there's a real connection there. There's a partnership between those listeners and that artist.
That's great, thank you. And it looks like we have another poll here for the audience on what first party playlist they've submitted to. So if you want to answer that, go ahead. And there's about 10 minutes left in the Q&A. If anyone did have any burning questions, they can put them in the chat or the Q&A function here. I guess looking towards the future, this again is maybe hard to answer, but I'd like to hear your input on how you think streaming will continue to evolve from here on out. 10 minutes, go.
Oh man, this is a really tough one. I think streaming, like anything, is going to probably start encompassing more aspects. You can already see Spotify adding in, ways for people to collaborate on there. They're now going to have live streams on there. They already have, all the information around your shows and your merch, like I was talking about before. I think everything's going to become more and more integrated, but I also think we're going to get more music. If we're at 60,000 songs a day right now, if I'm saying 100,000 by the end of the year, I'm not going to be surprised. And I think there's going to be more noise that happens, and there's going to be more complexity in terms of all the different places an artist can utilize to get their music heard. I think it's going to become a hard thing for artists. Like, this is probably the hardest point ever to really predict where things are going to go, because we're at this, this weird limbo world with the pandemic over the last year. But I think artists have found different ways of being heard over the last year when they've been at home, and when they get back out and they start playing shows or they're on tour, those things aren't going to go away, and that's maybe a good thing. You're going to be able to keep interacting. Maybe you built out a Twitch platform that's worked really well for you. Well, I don't think that's going to go away just because you're back on the road. And I think artists, the hardest thing is going to be like, how do you prioritize your time and where do you utilize it? In the end, it is about music. I get on these calls with artists, and we go over game plan and strategy and how to do things. In the end, it's how people are going to connect with that music. That is still the most important thing. But you have to do these other things 99.999999999 times if you're an artist. There's only like that fraction that doesn't have to participate in some way. I think you have to find authentic and genuine ways to interact with those other platforms. And that the artists that are able to do that, I think are going to have more success because it's not going to be a chore. People don't want to see people doing chores. Unless it's that old Replacements video where he's just like vacuuming and stuff, which I always, the anti-video. So maybe there's rare cases where it works, but for the most part, I think you're trying to do things that are engaging and extend your artist voice into these other realms. And I don't know where streaming is going to go exactly. Like it's really, really hard to predict. I do think these short, clippable ways of interacting are gaining more and more traction. I can see that definitely happening. I can see the amount of content that you're going to have to create is going to ratchet up even more. But I think those are all daunting things. The things that isn't daunting is figuring out which of these you're going to actually eventually, maybe not at first, but eventually really like doing or really find value there, because there's communities that you can build that are in all of these areas. And I think that's been a kind of touchstone forever with music is, smaller communities and niche communities. And my hope is that the niches are going to build out more and more as these things settle, where people are going to think, I'm not getting this thing that I really, really want that's really changing me in some sort of way. I think the best music has the power to alter your life, and streaming isn't necessarily there. There are times where we just want to put something on to have some sort of feeling that's generalized, but that's not really what got me into music. It was the songs and the albums that changed my perspective or changed my emotion in a grand way. And I feel my hope is that we're going to get more of that, because I've seen that sort of thing erode over the last couple of years. And that happens, we go in cycles. Things are new, they're fresh, they offer opportunity usually to emerging artists at first. It becomes solidified, it becomes part of just the overall strategy of everyone. And then the people with the most capital are able to take advantage of that situation. And eventually it gets broken by something else because people want something that actually means something special to them. I still think streaming gives you that opportunity, because I can go in there and hear a song about an artist. Prefab Sprout, I caught it on one of my friends' Spotify playlist. He made basically around his whole life. I had heard the name for 2 decades. I had never interacted with their music at all. Heard that one song, Wild Horses, and then I'm listening to Bonnie, and then I'm listening to their whole catalog, and now I'm going, oh my God, how did I not hear of this artist? These records are from the 80s and early 90s, and I've seen the name everywhere, and I've never connected. That can happen all the time, and streaming gives that opportunity to go down that rabbit hole even more. I think there's a lot of benefits to that, but the streamlining into areas that are safe and are what your tastes are already solidified as, that's boring. That's what tends to happen to most people as they get older. They go back, and nostalgia plays such a role on what they're listening to, and streaming can perpetuate that in major ways, and I think can do it at a younger and younger age. And that's the stuff that I'm hoping will get kind of disrupted and blown up over the next few years. And I think there's a lot of different things. I never thought I'd be telling, just every artist, you might want to check out TikTok, because it takes a bulldozer sometimes to these thoughts. Now it works in a certain way that's not going to work for everybody, but hopefully there's other things that come up in the next few years that are also going to work in that way. Bandcamp, I think, does it. There's definitely niches on there that are growing that just could not grow on Spotify the way it's set up right now. The more variety we have in the ways that we're able to access music is better. And even if it's these giant corporations that are now playing second fiddle in terms of what is breaking through, if they get more of a market share, that's great as well. You know, there's a lot of other philosophical questions about fair payment and artist roles, down from writers, producers, you know, engineers, all of these different things, and how they're going to get compensated in the future. But, you know, it's there. You're able to make something and put it up online very quickly now. That's why we have these numbers. And I you know, we were talking on the panel last week, I think you can now make music at a high level easier than any other time in the history of the world. When I was first starting, you know, trying to do home recordings, it was very, very difficult. You know, my first bands, it was like you put a tape recorder in the middle of the room, you press record, and that was your demo. That would not be someone's demo, I don't think, right now. Maybe an interesting aesthetic choice, but you're able to do things in a way, and you're able to learn. We have some artists that are teenagers. We have an artist that we've been working with, Cube, and he was all the music, you know, we've been kind of a part of. He made when he was 15, and his skills as a 15-year-old as an engineer and producer are mind-blowing to me. Plus, he's just an incredible artist with an amazing voice and amazing style. But that wouldn't have been, like, as a 15-year-old, when I was 15, I wasn't able to do that. I had to go into a studio that now the capabilities that someone can record at home well outpace what that studio had, that I had to spend, you know, thousands of dollars to get a demo made. So I think that's a great thing. And the way people can collaborate online through all of these different platforms, Discord, or you know, people are using Twitch or whatever social media platform you can connect with people, that's all amazing. And that, again, is building communities outside of the normal lines. Like at the beginning of this, I talked about where all my team members are from. I feel very, very integrated with these people, and we don't see each other because of the pandemic now, but we didn't really see each other in person before. And that's because of what's, you know, all of these different devices. You know, we can get obsessed with the evils of all of these things. But I think as an artist, if you can focus on the things that you feel are valuable to you and you can utilize, go down those roads. Don't worry about every little thing that everybody else is doing, because there's endless, you know, unless, you know, you can just always be doing this and never sleeping. There's going to be limitations there.
That's a great answer. Thank you. Yeah, I really like thinking about my own experience too with those kind of musical rabbit holes on streaming platforms, and how easy it is to get into a rabbit hole, and how cool and exciting that is, I guess, too, versus going to a store and having to spend so much money on CDs, and then you have to talk to the weird old guy in the back who's, you know, talking about the glory days and all that stuff. And it's just a very different vibe than going out and doing that the old fashioned way, which is still very awesome. But yeah, the amount of artists I've been able to discover through streaming services is far greater than I probably would have been able to achieve otherwise. Totally.
Yeah, there's a lot of benefit to it, right? Like we get hung up on the negatives because there are a lot of negatives with everything that's going on. But if we start utilizing them in the positives, like I wish these platforms were set up to build rabbit holes more. And they were when they first came out. It wasn't as curated. Like the reason we started paying attention to the user-generated playlisting is because they showed up on my front page. It's like, oh, maybe this is the thing that's correlating with why these things are doing well. They do not anymore, right? Like now it's very, very curated to fit a certain brand. And I think as an artist, you need to find ways for you that are going to break that system down.
That's great. Thank you. Guess that just about does our hour. I know we could talk about so much more, but do you have any kind of, I guess, like closing things that you want to put out there, or also maybe how people can find more about Auteur Research?
Yeah, so Auteur Research. Again, we're a PR and digital marketing company. And you can reach me at adam@auteurresearch.com, or you can go to our site, auteurresearch.com, which I think just went into the chat. Thank you. You can see a lot of our artists on there. We're pretty active on all our socials. TikTok, we're now getting involved in. You can go on our TikTok or our Reels on Instagram and see like our artists. They have little breakdowns. I don't make these. Matt, Ava, and Kristen on my team put them together, and they're quite wonderful. And they also put together a podcast every week that features all of the artists that we're working with and their new releases. So there's a rabbit hole there that you can go through on our socials to get in. We also have a playlist on Spotify called Auteur Monthly that highlights a lot of the people we've been working with. But yeah, it's a pretty varied world. Look at all these links. Thank you, Music Calgary.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us today, Adam. And thank you to the audience too. And thank you to Music Calgary for being so great. This is, I think, the last event of the whole darn thing this year. So thanks for making a great one. And I hope you have a good rest of your day.
You too. Thank you for having me on. And thank you. Yeah, it was great chatting. And thanks, Music Calgary. It's been fun.
Awesome. All right. Goodbye, everyone. Thanks so much. Yeah, happy Saturday.
Happy Saturday.